My grandparents left money, my parents are leaving messes, and somehow the difference explains almost everything about the family I grew up in. My parents have been split for more than 30 years now, long enough that their separation feels less like an event and more like a permanent climate. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies portray divorce. There were no explosive final scenes, no single moment everything fell apart. Instead, it was slow, quiet, and final. Two people who simply stopped moving in the same direction and never bothered to reconcile what that meant for the people left in between. Over time, their separation became the backdrop of my life. Holidays split in half. Different rules, different expectations, different narratives about what mattered and why. But the most important divergence, the one I didn't fully understand until much later, was philosophical. My parents didn't just part emotionally, they parted in how they understood money, responsibility, and legacy. Those differences simmered for decades. Now, they are crashing into me all at once. When my mom's father died, the result was what many people would call a windfall. A large inheritance arrived cleanly, efficiently, without complications, checks, accounts, assets transferred after a lifetime of accumulation. It represented discipline, restraint, and long-term thinking. My grandfather worked, saved, and planned. When he died, the money he left behind was supposed to be security, stability, breathing room. My mom and her husband, now in his mid-70s, used that money to buy a big, old 5-bedroom house. 3 separate living spaces. Far more room than 2 aging adults could ever realistically need. On the surface, it looked like success. A stately home. A symbol of having made it, but the house itself wasn't the problem. It was what followed. The space invited filling. And filling it they did. At first it was furniture. Then decorative pieces. Then antique slots of antiques. Cabinets, dressers, tables, chairs, china, knickknacks, artwork, rugs, clocks. Objects with age. Objects with stories, or at least the promise of stories. Each purchase carried a familiar justification. This is an investment. This is valuable. This is rare. This will be worth something someday. But someday never came. The house didn't become a curated collection. It became a warehouse of deferred decisions. Rooms stacked floor to ceiling. Closets unusable. Entire spaces existing solely to hold objects that no one actively enjoyed. What struck me over time wasn't just the quantity of things, but the emotional role they played. The objects weren't just objects. They were comfort, validation, distraction, proof that something meaningful was happening, proof that time was being filled. My dad's story runs on a parallel track. Different details, same destination. When my grandfather, his father, died about 15 years ago, instead, he treated it like permission. Permission to stop planning. Permission to stop working. Permission to stop thinking long-term. He retired early and decided he would simply live off that inheritance. And then he burned through it. Casinos became his routine. Hours upon hours feeding machines, chasing losses, convincing himself the next pull would turn everything around. It never did. Money evaporated in increments, small enough to ignore until suddenly there was nothing left. Today, that inheritance is gone. My dad lives on Social Security in a rented duplex. What remains isn't financial, it's physical. A sprawling collection of vinyl records and 8-track tapes, accumulated over years. Shelves. Boxes. Stacks. Music formats that already belonged to the past when he bought them, now preserved like fossils of decisions already made. Neither of my parents views their situation as a problem. To them, these are their lives, their choices, their right. And in the narrowest sense, they're correct. They earned the money. They inherited the money. They were legally free to spend it however they wanted. But choices don't exist in a vacuum. Every choice has downstream consequences. And the consequences of their choices are not landing on them, they're landing on their children. I should be clear about the family structure because it complicates everything further. I have 2 stepsisters and 2 brothers. 5 of us in total. Despite that, I am the one designated to handle both estates. Not because I want to, but because I'm the one who's organized. The one who handles paperwork. The one who can be trusted to follow through. My dad doesn't own property, so his estate will largely consist of personal possessions. My mom's house will eventually be sold, and whatever remains will be split 5 ways. But the possessions, the mountains of them are where reality turns ugly. I already know how this will unfold. All 5 of us will not agree to simply giving things away. Especially my stepdad's daughter, who assigns enormous emotional and imagined financial value to these objects. Every cabinet will be worth something, every piece of china will be important. Every box will need to be gone through, catalogued, debated. Arguments will erupt over fairness, over sentimentality, over imagined market value. And because I am the executor, the responsible one, it will all fall on me. The sorting, the selling, the mediating, the stress. I have tried to address this while there is still time. I have asked them, directly and repeatedly, to start unloading things now. To sell what they can. To donate what they don't need. To make decisions themselves instead of leaving them behind. I've told them plainly, I don't want this burden. I don't want to spend months or years sorting through possessions while also grieving your death. They continue to buy. That's the part that cuts the deepest. Not the spending. Not the absence of a large inheritance. The complete refusal to acknowledge the impact of their behavior on anyone else. I have a 15-year-old son. And I cannot imagine doing this to him. I cannot imagine choosing short-term comfort over long-term consideration. I cannot imagine leaving him chaos and calling it my right. To be absolutely clear, because people love to misunderstand this is not about money. I don't need their money. I've done well enough on my own that my family is secure. If there were no inheritance at all, I would be fine. What I am angry about is the work. The conflict. The administrative nightmare layered on top of grief. When a parent dies, there is already so much to manage. Funeral arrangements, banks, lawyers, titles, accounts. Endless phone calls and forms. There is the emotional weight to your own grief, your child losing a grandparent. The sudden finality of a relationship that was always complicated. Now add hoarding-level collections of objects that all need to be handled. Appraised, sold, stored, donated. Fought over. Items that will fetch maybe a quarter of what was paid for them, of that. Items no one actually wants. Items whose only remaining value is the conflict they generate. That is the legacy being left behind. And what makes it worse is that this is avoidable. They could deal with it now. They could simplify while they're alive and capable. They could spare their children the burden. But they don't. Because the objects make them feel good. Because collecting fills an emotional void. Because confronting the burden would require acknowledging mortality and responsibility. So instead, they choose denial. They choose comfort. They choose themselves. There is a generational pattern here that is hard to ignore. A generation that benefited enormously from opportunity, inheritance, and stability and then consumed it entirely. Not just financially, but emotionally. They abandoned the idea of stewardship in favor of personal gratification. When the bill comes due, it isn't sent to them. It's sent to their children. People see a line about inheriting a fraction of value and assume entitlement. That's wrong. I am not owed wealth. I am not angry that I wasn't handed a fortune. What I am owed, what every child is owed, is consideration. Consideration that death hurts. That grief is heavy. That children should not inherit unresolved decisions and deferred responsibility. I don't want their money. I don't want their stuff. I don't want their antiques, their records, or their justifications. I want peace. I want the ability to grieve without refereeing sibling disputes over objects no one truly needs. Most of all, I want to break the cycle. When my time comes, my son will not inherit a nightmare. He will not inherit storage units of avoidance. He will not inherit my failure to deal with my own life. If I leave him anything, it will be clarity. Simplicity. The knowledge that I thought about him not just while I was alive, but when I was gone. That, to me, is what a real legacy looks like. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below.